Recording
So
started.
far, thank you. So far, we've gotten a number of things regarding the overall overarching structure of our structure identified. For example, the chapter council will have each will be consisting of 2 representatives for each chapter. Chapter reps will have such and such authorities to change the DBGA bylaws, and the chapter council changes the MOA. The board of directors has authority and ownership over the specific scope of their job, so to speak. The leadership bodies are the executive board, the chapter council, and then the members of Dagger here. Chapter council, like a few things regarding how the chapter council can operate. It can make committees to do things. The directors can form subsidiary groups and hire or recruit assistants to do their jobs. The executive board is going to be the group receiving and reviewing new chapter applications and then recommending acceptance or rejection, which then gets confirmed by the chapter council. So the executive board is doing the legwork where the chapter council has the final say. Ditto for evaluating chapter status effectively and recommending chapters be removed to be voted on by the chapter council. Umbrella clause stating that anything not specifically delegated to the executive board is reserved by the chapter council. We need a quorum of chapter reps to change any bylaws. Any bylaw changes need an extended voting period. Executive board can implement approved funding projects, but then we ended last time with the question still up in the air of who can propose funding projects and how do they get approved. And then our stated goal at the end of our last meeting was today to focus on hashing out those funding and financial elements of our overarching bylaw structure. Two proposals given last time. Let me make sure I'm looking at the chat. Okay. Two proposals put forward last time, or an element of some proposals last time, which we then broke apart and we voted on the who executes funding projects piece. The other part was who can then authorize funding projects. One option was that the chapter council votes to authorize any funding projects. Another option was that the executive board has the authority to enact funding projects on their own without going through the chapter council within specific limitations specified in the bylaws. Does anyone have excuse me, to start today's meeting off, these are what were proposed last time. Do we want to would anyone like to second either of these proposals today, or propose an alternative method of how funding projects could be authorized? And this is separate from who proposes funding projects. We can discuss and vote on that separately. Stone, please go ahead.
I did actually have a hand, but still, didn't you want to make a presentation first about the current rewrite or current writing of the bylaws?
That can happen later on in the meeting.
Okay.
We get a few more people if anyone else shows up.
All right. In which case, I'll take it back. So I just kind of want to give a few seconds about what I proposed and why I proposed it, and why I proposed it in its way I did. And then everyone's welcome to argue with why, but I think they're all connected, and I kind of wanted to make that sure that was all brought forward.
Okay. To clarify, this list of stuff here is a summary of what Stone originally proposed.
Correct. So what I was originally proposing, this is based on conversation that was in one of the threads earlier, was that maybe not this exact words, but that the chapter council would be the body that says what can be done to create funds for their organization. So if the chapter council could vote on, say, a small thing like create a GoFundMe for this specific project, or the chapter council could vote on a larger thing like selling merchandise, just as a blanket statement, or the chapter council could vote on chapters have to have some sort of fee, or the chapter council could vote on flagship events have some sort of fee. So what is available is a vote by the chapter council. Based on the other conversations, then it would be the executive board who then takes the what, which is either crafted broadly as go sell things or go sell bumper stickers that look like, let's say, Dagger here on them. Whatever the wording was from the chapter council is going to be limiting what the executive board is allowed to do. If it's go sell things on the website, then the executive board can go and figure out what they think is best. If it's go sell bumper stickers on the website, well, the executive board has to do bumper stickers. So it's based on, it can be as broad or as limiting as that proposal is. That's what I was kind of envisioning with this. The second thing, though, was based on a lot of the conversations that were had in there, was that there would be certain things that the chapter council would never be able to approve by a simple majority vote. And that included specifically Dagger here to grant exclusive construction or sale of Dagger here equipment to any party. Basically, we cannot say, Gorg, you're the only person who's allowed to sell Dagger here branded equipment, and effectively keep Forge Foam off the market. We cannot basically write into the bylaws that is not allowed to happen. The other being, because there has been very loud pushback on this, is yearly membership fees for all Dagger here participants is not a viable funding source. So that's B and C here. Now, whether we actually want to include those specifics, I put them in as bylaw specifics as opposed to just something less stringent behind just a simple majority, and that a bylaw is expected to require a much larger percentage of the vote. So it's specifically protecting unless there is a much higher percentage vote of those specific types of funding projects. Now, I don't know how much that actually really matters, but this is based off the conversation that was in the thread, and I think that it is a safe idea. Now, the wording here is definitely up for debate. I mean, obviously, this is kind of written as to be some usable wording, but I didn't. But I know since we're rewriting everything that these we're doing, the wording I put forth does not specifically matter. But that was the gist of what I was putting forth.
Okay, thank you. So the question of specifically what funding streams should be disallowed within the bylaws that we are creating, I think is an important topic and something that should get discussed, but I think that's a separate topic from which body authorizes funding. So that is something that I think are the identifying disallowed funding streams is something that we'll get to today. But first, would you say that the chapter council is the body that votes to authorize funding project is an adequate summary of that component of your proposal?
Yes.
Okay, so Stones, so does anyone second that component of this proposal here, that the chapter council be the body that authorizes funding projects? That is seconded. Is there any discussion or debate, or does anyone have phrasing suggestions for that before we move it to a vote? To keep this consistent with other things, maybe the chapter council has the authority to. Yeah. I don't see anything in chat.
And
Yes, please go ahead.
the other option would be that the executive board can enact funding projects that are not disallowed that do not have a conflict with the bylaws. I personally don't agree with that, but does anyone actually want that one instead? or have an argument for that one.
Does anyone second the executive board being the body that authorizes or has the authority to enact its own funding?
So, hand, okay to talk?
Yes, go ahead.
Um, the wording for these, at least for myself, seems almost like they're separate issues. It sounds as if the executive board would be enacting or perhaps proposing, and then the chapter council would approve those projects. Am I misled in that, or is that kind of what it's going with?
I was under the impression that it was two different proposals that kind of had different implications. And that last time we agreed that executive board implements funding projects, but not approves them.
Okay, I got you now. Thanks.
I think the difference is if the executive board can create its own funding projects without chapter council authorization, it gives the executive board a lot more free will to change and implement things without needing some sort of vote to say that they're allowed to do it. Which might make it gives them more of a powerful executive board, but and gives them more ability to create more funds. But it might be more controversial in the long run, as they unless we have a strong list of can't do's. I know I'm arguing from both sides of this,
Sorry,
but it's an
I
important
was muted.
point. So
So far the chapter council one has been seconded, the executive board one has not. Does anyone have an alternative phrasing or a second for the executive board having the authority to create its own funding? Moog, go ahead.
Yes, can I just add to the second part of what you have boxed off?
Yes.
DGBY may create its own funding projects with possibly saying with chapter council oversight.
We could. How is that different than the chapter council authorizing funding projects?
Well, my only concern is it says may create, but it doesn't necessarily say about after the creation of that specific project. If that makes sense. Like, what do they do? Okay, so the executive board creates a project. Then what?
Either way, so for either of these, we've already decided that the executive board is implementing any funding project. All funding projects are being implemented by the executive board. The question at hand currently is who can tell them whether they can. Can they tell themselves, or does the chapter council tell them?
I like that wording better. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone second the executive board has the authority to authorize its own funding projects?
I would like to actually make a motion that we do this as a either or vote, or if someone brings up a third, some sort of
Okay, so we can vote on these together with the vote being either the chapter council authorizes or the executive board authorizes. Is that process motion seconded? That is seconded. So currently up for vote will be either the chapter council has the authority to authorize funding or the executive board has the authority to authorize funding. Any comments, concerns, or phrasing suggestions before we move this to a vote? Okay. So. So I've copy pasted those into the committee motions and drafts. Please, thank you for your patience as we move that into the committee motions chat to be voted on.
Point of order.
Please go ahead.
I don't remember anyone addressing Jeffrey's idea in the committee motion drafts.
Did I miss it?
Yeah.
I did miss that. Thank you, Jeffrey. The difference being the or methods at the end. So Jeffrey suggests that we add the words or methods here. Does anyone second that suggestion? Jeffrey, go ahead.
I thought adding methods might be good because that seems to be more in line with what Stone was suggesting about how the chapter council would say that kind of in perpetuity until the chapter council rescinds this ability, the executive board can sell merchandise. That seems to be more like a method rather than a project. The project could be interpreted as kind of a one-time item. That's why I wanted to add that.
Okay. Okay, I like it. Is that seconded? Seconded. I will add or methods to both of these. Any other? Thank you, Luda, for pointing that out. Any other concerns before we move this to vote? I don't see any objections or comments or concerns. Thank you for your patience as we get this into the voting chat. Okay, voting has begun. Please cast your votes. Okay, motion goes to the chapter council. Past 7:25. Okay. And I can't find my stylus. That's great. Okay, next one. Disallowed funding streams. Stone, go ahead.
So, yeah, disallowed funding streams. Do we actually want to write this into the bylaws now? Would be question one. Two, are these two ones that we want to write into the bylaws now? Are there others that we want to write into the bylaws now? Because this could always be added to the bylaws later by the actual chapter council.
Okay, so in terms of how we systematically address this, first motion, do we want to, as our decision-making body today identify disallowed funding streams. Is that motion seconded? That we should go through the process of delineating disallowed funding streams. That motion is seconded. Excellent. So, any objection to us as a body identifying disallowed funding streams to read into the bylaws? I don't see any objections. In that case, let's start proposing disallowed funding streams. Stone, do you want to pick one to start with?
Sure, the easy. Well, maybe not the easier. Let's go with 3C at first.
Okay.
Year,
3C.
yearly membership fees for all Dagger Hero participants. So that
Okay.
would probably should be changed to Dagger Hero members, but yeah.
Thanks for your patience for just a second. So as we start going through disallowed funding streams proposals. First proposal of the disallowed funding stream, yearly membership fees for all Dagger Hero participants. Is that motion seconded? Okay. Suggestion to add mandatory membership fees.
Would that be implying that voluntary fees are allowed?
Yes, I believe that would imply voluntary fees are allowed. Also, perhaps we should change yearly to periodic
Agreed.
so that there aren't like biannual ones or monthly ones or anything like that. And if somebody has strong feelings about voluntary membership fees, we can discuss and vote on that as a separate item. Probably don't need to specify periodic. Okay. Okay, current phrasing, mandatory membership fees for all DAG participants.
I agree with it, as presenting it at least.
Any other comments or suggestions before we move this to a vote? Any other comments or suggestions? I don't see any. Then I think we are ready to move this to vote. Okay, the motion is in the chat. Please vote, chapter reps. Motion passes. There we go. Okay. Any other proposals for prohibited funding streams? Jeffrey, go ahead.
In a similar vein, I'd like to add possibility that mandatory, I guess, chapter fees should also be a disallowed funding stream.
A mandatory chapter fees has been proposed as a disallowed funding stream. Is that motion seconded? Reagan, go ahead.
So a question on that mandatory chapter fees, you're talking as overall for, say, like my chapter, Hyboria, has to pay something. So you're saying disallow that, and that's different from the other one? Just trying, I'm a little confused.
So in concept, I think the previous motion was to make sure that individual members of Dagger here were not charged an annual fee or any other type of periodic fee to continue being part of Dagger here.
Okay, got it. Different. Perfect.
And
Thank you.
so this is different. This would be for the chapters as an organization.
Cool.
Yeah. Dragon sends that motion. Stone, you said hand?
Yeah, I'm actually against this.
Okay.
Well, I don't think it's I think that nominal fees could be a useful way to ensure that chapters maintain some form of activity. I definitely understand that I don't think it should be a financial burden to the chapter, but asking something like $40 a year might be a way to provide enough funding for us to stay generally afloat. And I don't think that $40 a year from a chapter is a whole lot. I mean, that's $1 for an event, for 2 events from a very small chapter, sort of thing.
Okay, useful input. Any response? Jeffrey, go ahead.
I think one of the reasons I put this in is that, you know, our chapter in New York, we do have two, obviously not during the pandemic, but 2 yearly big events that we run that we invite other chapters to. But that's free, you know, and we do social events, but those are all free. We don't charge additionally for people to go to, say, a Renaissance fair. People just pay for the ticket. So our chapter doesn't have its own source of revenue in addition to anything else that'd be going on, even though we do have quite a bit of activity. You know, we run practices 52 weeks a year. So if we end up requiring chapters to pay fees, then that kind of fundamentally changes how we have to organize and run our chapter. And that's not something that our chapter would like.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have a response to that?
And
Still, go ahead.
keep in mind, guys, that while funding sources like, you know, t-shirts and bumper stickers are solid ways of doing that, they are not reliable sources of income. And having at least one consistent source of income that can help keep the administration afloat from year to year is going to be, I think, a long-term key here. So at some point, someone's going to have to buckle down and say, yes, we are going to consistently year to year give Dagger here as an organization this amount of funding so that we get all the administration stuff that we've been wanting in return.
Reagan?
I guess that was my concern too, because my chapter's kind of small, and the event that we do every year doesn't have a whole lot of revenue. I mean, we tried to implement some other things, so I guess that was my concern. But as you guys are talking, I do understand where you guys are coming from now as a source for the organization as a whole. So.
Stone, go ahead.
I'm also going to point out that you would still need a majority vote of some sort of the chapter council in order for any of this, for some sort of chapter fee to be applied. So just because we don't disallow it doesn't mean it actually would happen. And those not being able to do it might be something that the whatever eventual proposal puts in could be a very reasonable thing. So if you have under X number of regular members don't pay sort of thing, could be the proposal eventually.
Okay. Any other comments? That is an important note that voting not to disallow this doesn't necessarily mean that a mandatory chapter fee would be implemented by the chapter council. Any objection to bringing this to vote? Okay, then I think we are ready to bring this to vote. Thank you for your patience.
Point of order.
Please go ahead.
Tracking the conversation, I'm not quite sure that we are bringing anything to vote. I'm not clear where we are with that. Thanks.
Okay, so, whoops.
Sorry, let me rephrase.
There we go.
In other words, it sounds like people have arrived at the decision to not vote on this, is my understanding from the conversation, but please
Okay,
correct me if I'm wrong.
Jeffrey, go ahead. I didn't see anyone saying we shouldn't vote. Though I could have missed, I just heard people debating both sides of this particular issue. Would we rather this get postponed to a different day or put to rest? Jeffrey?
I guess the additional concern that I have about theoretical mandatory chapter dues, we could call them, is that basically that's just another way to have mandatory membership dues. Because ultimately, if we, I know this is hypothetical because we're not voting to require chapter dues, but if we allow that, then ultimately the chapter revenues are coming from somewhere, and that almost certainly is going to be from your membership. So if we're requiring chapter dues, that's kind of a proxy. It's not exactly the same, but it's basically a proxy for requiring mandatory membership dues, you know?
Okay. That is an important point and something to keep in mind, but now we have an objection to this vote, which has been seconded. So I think we can keep this in mind, that there is community objection. to having mandatory chapter fees without voting on this today.
That sounds. I actually think that this should be put to an actual vote, but this is an issue
Okay,
that
you think this?
we have actual discussion on. So let's actually have
Okay.
a vote on it. That we can always have additional votes later, but it's fine
Okay,
for us to
so-
have nays win if that's
Yeah.
just as the word of this group.
That's true. Okay, so Stone motions for us to actually vote on disallowing mandatory mandatory chapter fees. Is that motion seconded to actually have a vote on this? Okay, so motion to actually vote on this issue has been seconded. The issue we will be voting on is including mandatory chaptership fees as a disallowed funding stream. Motion is in the chat. Chapter reps, do the thing. Okay, this motion does not pass. So for those of you that are concerned about the implementation of mandatory chapter fees, that is definitely something to keep in mind. And perhaps to bring to the chapter council once that gets implemented. But for the purposes of our group, we're going to put that aside. But thank you for the proposal. That was useful discussion. Are there any other motions for prohibited funding streams? And then after this, Sil, I'm going to give you a few minutes to make your announcement. Since I think we have just about everyone we're going to have today. Stone, go ahead.
All right. Motion. This is probably going to need to be reworded. To disallow granting exclusive rights for construction or sale of Dagger Here field equipment. I think the words that are important in there is exclusive rights and field equipment is what I'm implying. And when I say field, I mean stuff that you use employing the game of Dagger Here.
Really good suggestion, adding merchandise.
I'm actually against that phrasing because that we have to protect our service mark, which implies that when we create when the executive board creates a funding source to sell T-shirts or bumper stickers, it is we'd be doing it with some sort of print on demand or some other agency like that. So
well, those wouldn't be exclusive.
but it would be exclusive at the time for, hey, you create this specific bumper sticker.
It's telling somebody, please make this bumper sticker for me isn't exclusive unless you're also prohibiting everyone else from doing the same.
But in general, since we do have to protect the service mark, I know I'm kind of being semantic here.
Yeah, no, I actually kind of agree with Stone on this. Oh, sorry, Hand.
Go ahead.
Okay. I actually agree with Stone on this. Service marks and IPs, use it or lose it. And so if we are not specifically protecting someone from printing. Excuse me just a second. apologies. If we are not specifically disallowing people from, or if we're keeping it open, if we say anyone can just use the Dagger Here trademark to put it on a T-shirt, that's a huge problem for our service mark.
That's not what this
So
means, though. I'm sorry, you sounded like you were continuing. I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, I'm rereading the wording in case I misunderstood.
I think this is meant to imply we can't identify any specific merchant as the one and only merchant that can sell Dagger Here merchandise or Dagger Here field equipment. Like, no singular merchant entity can be the one and only
So you kind of have to have it
salesperson.
be that way when you're dealing with branded. You have to say you are the one and only person that we are giving rights to for this contract. So that nobody else can say, oh, well, they're making T-shirts, so I'm going to start making T-shirts and I'm going to make a profit. But I don't have a contract with Dagger Here, so I just pocket all the profits.
Dragon, go ahead. Thank you. So that helps clarify.
Would that be more of a trademark issue that you're talking about there? Just because when I think of the construction self-dagger or field equipment, I think of like, if I buy stuff from Forged Foam, that means I can only buy stuff from Forged Foam. When I'm thinking of like using the Dagger Here emblem or anything like that, that's more of a trademark in my opinion that they would have to contact Dagger Here for rights, just like I have to contact Purdue if I want to put something on shirts.
Right, exactly, and that's specifically the word merchandise. That's where my red flag goes up, because it's like, well, what does merchandise mean? Does that mean T-shirts? Because it's probably going to mean T-shirts.
Okay,
Gotcha.
so for the sake of simplifying our current debate, let's address merchandise separately. And Stone, your original proposal was meant to talk about like no one merchant can be the only one that sells like dag swords. and stuff,
Correct.
right?
Correct. We cannot say everyone has to have forged foam swords in order for them to be legal. And you may not buy Gorg.
Okay.
We cannot say that, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone second our current proposal, specifically referring to the sale of dag field equipment, meaning foam weapons and stuff? That motion is seconded. Any phrasing suggestions or other comments or concerns? I don't see any objections or any suggestions. Any objection to moving this to vote? Oh, thank you for the draft wording, Luda. Newest phrasing. The right to promote and construct field equipment for Dagger Here shall not be given exclusively to any one entity. Any objection? Then I think we are ready to move that to vote. Motion is in the chat. That motion passes. Okay, Sil, your announcement?
Yes. Okay. So we are currently in the process of doing the overall draft. If you see in the committee meeting section, there is at the bottom the bylaw draft writing group. That is where I'm organizing the current rewriting of the bylaws. With the specific, you take the overall motions that we've worked on, and then you write the actual rules for that. So far, Brogar has taken over the executive board responsibilities, and Sarah is doing the chapter council structure and chapter voting right process. I know some people have expressed interest in writing these bylaws, so if anyone wants to sign up for any sections to be written, and I'm going to start adding the chapter funding too, or the funding section too right now.
So looking for volunteers to help contribute to the ongoing draft writing process that we will be presenting to this committee in early August.
If no one wants to step up today, that's fine. Just mention in that group chat that you're interested in doing it and what section you're interested in taking over.
Thank you, Sil. Cyril, did you want to add something concerning merchandise now that we've covered the previous issue? Or the previous motion? Take your time.
Y'all hear me?
Yes.
So I guess my main question is, it sounds as if there is a difference between the executive board being the exclusive grantor of rights versus one merchant being the exclusive producer of merchandise. I don't know if that's only my thought, or if everybody has already separated those things and we're saying that that only one person can be, only one entity can be the exclusive maker of DAG merchandise. My thought is that the first part of the executive board holds the rights and they have the ability to grant merchandise production to whomever, but not exclusively one merchant, if that makes sense.
So thank you. And so to further my own understanding, could Dagger here, while maintaining its intellectual property, grant the rights to the Dagger here trademark to two bodies at the same time, to two merchants? Saying, you two merchants, please make Dagger here t-shirts, for example.
Yes, that
Yeah,
would
go
be
ahead.
perfectly allowed.
Okay. So then that would mean that the Dagger here executive board / chapter council, whichever is the one with this particular authority, executive board then, would be an exclusive grantor of rights, providing or granting those rights to several specific bodies, correct?
Correct. That would follow IP law.
Okay. So then,
And I guess
yeah, go ahead.
if it's already IP law, then I guess we don't necessarily need it within the bylaws, do we?
In my opinion, it would help to clarify, especially for other people to know that the board of directors is the one specifically holding the IP, if that's where the IP is going to rest.
Get you. Okay.
Okay, so does that mean adding a proposal that's phrased something like the executive board has the power to grant merchants the right to make Dagger here merchandise or something like that? I'm not sure exactly how that should be phrased, but or rather, is that something that we want to specify here, is that the executive board can sell merchandise? Or is that something that we should leave to the chapter council to decide whenever they're creating funding streams?
In my opinion, this should kind of be tabled for a different discussion, because it also is going to matter where the IP is being held, who holds the IP. You know, if we invest it in one person, or does the whole board as a group hold the rights to the IP and have to make a decision as a group?
Okay, so then we can put aside the granting of rights to sell merchandise and the ability to make a decision about selling merchandise is already within the listed powers of the chapter council. So that's not something we necessarily need to agree on here as a body. Does that mean that we want to discuss intellectual property and who holds those IP rights today? Recognizing that we are running a little low on time. Stone, go ahead.
Currently, the service mark for Dagger Here is owned by Dagger Here Battle Games LLC. Dagger Here Battle Games Association LLC. That paperwork literally just came in yesterday to get it re-upped. The meaning, since Dagger Here Battle Games Association, DBGA, owns it, and the DBGA is the board plus the chapter council plus the members. I mean, there is the question of who enforces it, but it is owned by DBGA. There is copyrights on old rulebooks. Protecting a copyright on a set of rules is near impossible, so I wouldn't even say that's a big issue. There is copyrights on other creative elements that the DBGA has created, effectively the web page. You don't actually have to pay for these sort of copyrights; they just kind of are assumed. But that's all by the DBGA, since the DBGA owns the web page. That's just the state of where things are.
That's me paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Some old rules, quote unquote.
When I say okay, there is a copyrighted handbook back from the 80s that has Eritar's name on it, and it has a Greymail's name on it. There's a second, even older, like early 80s, late 70s handbook that has Eritar's name on it.
So, two handbooks from around the 1980s and the webpage are the three primary copyrights that are held by. Okay.
Yeah. And the copyright for the handbook was never officially transferred, but then all of the supplemental material that is currently on the webpage is owned as copyright by the DBGA. So.
Okay. So
the game logo, that's under the service mark, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
No, it's a service mark, which means it's just the word, it's not a logo.
Oh, our logo would be under copyright then.
Yeah, that's the best you can put it under. We have not applied for a trademark for that logo.
Gotcha.
Okay, so is it copyrighted?
It is copyrighted in the sense that we created it, and if someone was to copy that exact word plus font styles, it would be an infringement of our copyright.
Okay, so a very, very, very specific copyright.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Or if they, to get deeper into the weeds, if they tried to plagiarize it and not make an exact copy, but make it so close that it's indistinguishable.
Yeah.
The service mark, though, means that if anyone else calls themselves Dagger here, we can file suit.
Okay. So keeping in mind that the service mark is technically owned by DBGA LLC and that body will continue to exist after these bylaws get implemented, in theory, depending on, I'm sure, exactly their phrasing and some other logistical stuff, but the implementation of these bylaws won't necessarily dissolve that organization or the service mark. Is this something that we think we need to decide on as a body, or is this something that we can table for later?
I mean, I will say that in the current bylaws you have, the vice president is responsible for enforcing it, but that's just enforcement duties of making sure that's the one person who goes around, and if there's an infringement, they do the paperwork.
Okay, noted.
But and I think someone should have that in the executive board.
Yeah.
And I feel like someone should have in the bylaws, or a group have specific rights to distribute and manage the copyright and not just hunt people down in case there's an infringement.
Okay, so notes to somewhere in the bylaws specify which body or which person, body, or bodies specify, enforce, distribute,
Currently, the
and
contract with the
manage.
chapters grants the chapter the use to redistribute the handbooks and the rule set, which are copyrighted materials copyrighted by DBGA.
Okay. So then, is this something that we as a body want to decide on today, or is this something that we as a body want to table?
Table?
Motion to table. Is that motion seconded? Seconded. Any objection? I don't see an objection, but I do see typing. So just gonna. Oh, okay. No objection. We're gonna table this and the IP stuff.
Oh, don't delete that. That's good stuff.
I will.
Unless you're putting that in writing somewhere else.
No, Control Z fails.
Crap. My undo
no.
button stopped.
It's in the recording.
Yeah, it is in the recording. Oh, thank you, Runa. You rock. Okay. So I will at least save that for later. Oh, that is the first time undo has failed me in like years. Tragic. Okay, any other business for us to address today? Yeah. Possible business to address today could include something regarding the arbiter, which we have not yet formalized anything regarding the arbiter. Regionalization of the chapter council, the role of shadow, or any other business.
Hand.
Yeah, go ahead.
Motion for next time, just so that I get the conversation
Okay,
going.
motion for next time.
We take the arbiter as is, with the exception of how we vote, because voting's being rewritten. The reason why I say take the arbiter as is that while I do fully agree that it needs to have changes done to it, I think that it should be the job of the actual chapter council to make the changes and not this body.
Okay.
On the other hand, I'm actually not going to be allowed to make motions next time. I'm not going to be a voting member, so.
Okay. So motion for next time to have the operative position effectively unchanged within our current bylaws or within our newly written bylaws, except for its election process, with the understanding that amending that rule is a job better left for the newly elected chapter council. Okay, noted. And that is next on my list of things to cover. That is basically all dealt with at this point. I don't see any other business. Sirle had to step out to fix audio. Is Sirle back yet? Luda, do you know that she had something that she wanted to bring up?
I have not seen a response from Cirle.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna give her another minute or two in case she had something. And then if there's no other business, we are going to wrap. And while we do that, I'm just gonna. We've already dealt with chapter fees. Or that chapter fees has already been discussed and tabled. Or discussed and put aside. Executive director providing clarification. / interpreting the bylaws. Is something for next time possibly. Motion to regionalize the chapter council. And then other possible things there. Remain IP. Which I will fill in when I take a look at the notes later. Okay, then I think we are all set to wrap. Thank you all for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. If please, we really, really, really need volunteers to help write these bylaws. Your efforts here have been amazing. We very much appreciate everybody showing up and contributing to these discussions and contributing to these votes. Now is the time for us to actually write stuff down, and we need as much help as we can get. So please, if you have 2 hours this week, that could be very, very helpful. We would like, ideally, we have a fully written set of bylaws to propose to this body by the 1st or the 8th. The 8th is really our last deadline for getting a first set of bylaws so that we have time for everyone to review and vote on it, and then make amendments before we push it forward to the chapter council or to the Oratory War Council. Excuse me. So thank you all. Look forward to seeing you. Have a fantastic day.
Recording ended.